Greetings sailors, and welcome to a look at the new updated version of Operation Narai, which of course was taken out of the game for a little bit. But I have to say, it isn't that big of a change compared to the old Narai, at least in terms of the gameplay. As you'll see on the end scorecards, the economy of Narai has definitely been changed, although it's still not bad. It's just you're not going to be farming those million credit games like you could before, and likewise the XP gain seems to have been toned down a bit as well. But compared to the changes that were made to Raptor Rescue, with all the extra randomization that was added in, and I was going to cover that, and then I was trying to unpick all of the different variations that you could get, and by the time I even felt like I'd gotten halfway, they'd moved on to the next operation, so I kind of gave up on that, but I might try and cover that at some point. But yeah, compared to the changes made to that, and maybe even the minor tweak they made to Ultimate Frontier, where they changed all of the secondary conditions that made it almost impossible to do. This feels like a more mild set of changes in comparison. Basically, it's the same Narai we had before, only things are spread out a little bit more across the map. And there's one or two specific changes, but they've spaced things out a bit. So instead of everybody sticking together as a clump and being able to do every objective, you now have to have really at least one ship going down south, to the southwest rather, because that is now a fixed point as to where the enemy transports will escape from. They don't try and go to the southeast corner anymore. It's only the southwest corner that is an escape point. So you have to have somebody specifically going down there to tackle the transports. And the aircraft carrier, the named aircraft carrier, King, you also have to have somebody that goes to tackle that, because that will... and you'll notice there is now a difference in the islands themselves. There's a little gap right on the east-hand side of the map. King will make its way up through that gap and go all the way up to a 10. And it won't exit the map, but it will just sit there. So basically somebody has to specifically also go for that. And in both cases, really it's best if a cruiser does it, but if you're in one of the faster battleships, then maybe, the circumstances dictating, it might not be a terrible idea to do it then. So this is my first 5-star go through of this. The same ships are good for it as were good for it before, really. The German tier 7 battleships, the Scharnhorst especially, are very good for it. I think KGV is pretty good for it. Nagato and Colorado maybe a bit less so. This here, the Nelson, it's okay. You're going to see I'm going to do very well in it, but I also had a run in the Scharnhorst where I probably did as much, if not maybe a bit more damage. And the Scharnhorst just has much more responsive turrets overall, which is, that's a thing, especially when you're getting into the poor areas. Having that turret rotation, having those good secondaries does become very important. So far, nothing looks particularly different. You've got the usual first group of enemies spawning either to the west or the north of the initial start point, and you're escorting the transports through, and it's all basically the same secondary conditions as far as I can tell. Although I think, having said that, no, it's not quite. The condition, because it's still that alternate win condition of either kill everything or land a certain number of troopers. I think they actually increased the number of troopers that you have to land for the final condition, or if not the final condition, then for the secondary condition, because there's a secondary condition to get 1400, and maybe that was the one that was lower before. Anyway, they changed one of those conditions to do with landing troopers, and I now just cannot remember which one was which, but otherwise it doesn't appear to be particularly different. So we're just making our way forwards, taking out the forts, dealing with the enemies, and it's around about now, and I think it does, the operation itself does tell you that you have to go and tackle the transports, but it's around about now that you'll probably want somebody peeling off to go to the south to deal with the transports, and somebody peeling off to the east, as our Boise is doing, to tackle the carrier. And the carrier especially, it does help if you're in an AA cruiser, or at least a cruiser with a defensive, because, you know, those planes are going to be coming at you, and if you are not going after the carrier, they will do what they were doing before. In the previous version, they will try and hit you, but they'll also try and hit the transports as well. So there's our old friend the Missouri, which is, yeah, I'll blast the horn to give this York fair warning that I can't really avoid them. If you've got a ship with torpedoes, the Missouri is not that hard to deal with. I've had a couple of decent runs with torpedo cruisers. I also had to go with a Haider, actually, and was all set to go and torpedo the Missouri in the face, but the Missouri focused me. And of course the Haider only has one torp launcher. What did those hits do? They knocked out the torp launcher. Didn't even crit it, no, they just knocked it out in one go. So by the time I got into the inner harbour, I not only didn't have any torpedoes, but at that point I think all my AA had been knocked out as well, so I was pretty well muted. And that group didn't do so well generally. We'd actually lost the repair ship because nobody else was able to kill the Missouri, and the Missouri and one of our transports, the lead transport in fact, the one with the healing aura, actually rammed each other. And generally the Missouri seems to avoid, or tries to avoid ramming things, but in this case it didn't work. They rammed into each other, and that was that. So I think we did actually win that one, but it was only a 1-star. And I have to say, it is still, with this operation, compared to, say, oh, I just said the name like 3 seconds ago. Raptor Rescue, there, for goodness sake, brain. It's still comparatively easy to beat this one, but it is also very, very easy to lose secondary conditions. So far, over just a couple being played overall, it seems like the most frequently encountered lost star is due to one of the transports being knocked out, basically. So it's important, especially that the battleships are in place to absorb the hits, essentially. I've seen a few too many cases of the battleship players trying to hide out of the way, trying to hide in the aura of the lead transport, particularly, which doesn't heal battleships for very much at all. I think it's like 50 hit points a second, and it's more than that for cruisers. I think it's about 200 a second for cruisers, and it definitely is that for destroyers. That might be an issue in of itself, by the way, but anyway. So yeah, Raptor Rescue, you know, by contrast, I found with the sheer amount of randomization and the difficulty in predicting where enemies were going to come from, it was a lot easier to fail it outright, even compared to before, when it was not an infrequent occurrence. It feels like they, not only that they made it harder to get a 5-star, but they actually made it a lot harder to get finished overall. So, anyway, we're into the inner harbour now. This is the second part. I've racked up like 100k damage, which is alright. There's the usual destroyers and things running around. Although I think, no, there is still 2 of them, because there's the Campbelltown and then there's a Clemson or something that runs around as well. So you still really want to have ships entering from both sides. What our Scharnhorst is doing in this one, by the way, I don't like that. We're lingering a bit too far behind, and now they've taken that route when we already had 2 cruisers there. I don't entirely know why they did that. I've seen other games where we had 3 ships, for instance, including, what was it, like 2 battleships, or was it a battleship and 2 cruisers? I don't know, but they all went chasing off after the carrier, and that is an unnecessary amount of ships. It leaves you short-handed for dealing with the push into the actual base itself. So you can see our Boise is busy taking down the carrier. There's another carrier that appears, as you can see, but that one doesn't count as a secondary condition. It does have a couple of escort ships, which you have to be aware of, but as long as you don't get yourself torpedoed, they aren't that difficult to deal with, unless you're horrendously low health going into it. I'll note, by the way, I haven't tried carriers yet with this revamped version. Carriers were not that great for this operation overall anyway, although it just really does depend which cruisers spawn. There are plenty of battleships for you to go after, but once you get into the final phase, when you get things like the Dallas and the Atlanta, I think there's a Straws that can spawn, these are all going to have defensive AA, so you get right to the end and carriers are actually sort of at their least useful at that point, just because of the overlapping AA fields. Destroyers also don't seem like they're hugely useful overall, but that's not really new for operations. Most of the operations do not favour destroyers, especially Japanese destroyers. There just isn't the time in the room to deal with long torpedo reloads. You have to be relying more on your guns than anything else, and even then, just the nature of destroyer guns means that it's going to be hard to do enough damage to actually tackle them in time. Yeah, I was having issues with, you might notice the mouse there, I actually recorded this one live, I was having issues with control clicking on ships to focus my secondaries on them. I don't entirely know why. Anyway, so, as you may have picked up, I'm being rather aggressive here on purpose, because if you let especially the things with torpedoes get past, they will torp the transports, and although we have passed the point where we need to not lose transports for the secondary condition, of course if the transports get damaged or blown up while they are landing troops, you can still lose a star as a result of that. So yeah, focusing the things with torps is especially important, and if you are baiting them to drop on you, then they'll at least have to reload to try and go for the transports, which will all take them extra time. And I think it really is the battleship's job to be doing this in this operation, to be getting in the face of the enemies, and with a bit of dodging, you know, you can generally predict when things are going to try and torp you, but it can still go badly wrong. So I can sort of see why some battleship players are a bit more cautious about it, but then you get the ones that are just way too cautious, at which point you end up losing stars or even losing the operation. So the next wave does have two things with torps in, so I'm actually going to have to turn around here, and that leads to a bit of awkwardness with me not really planning ahead in terms of which way I want my turrets to be pointing. The Nelson itself doesn't have a hugely slow turret traverse, but it's slow enough that, I mean, I should have just kept my turrets pointing the way they were pointing essentially, and instead I get a bit indecisive. I start thinking, should I try and finish off the Queen Elizabeth? No, my allies are going to do it. No, I should try and shoot the cruisers because the cruisers have torpedoes. And then as I'm pulling, decide to pull round the turn the opposite way I was going anyway, I rapidly realised that, oh yeah, no, I should have just kept my turrets pointing the way they were pointing to begin with. So that definitely hinders my damage output somewhat. Well, having said that, I'm still up to nearly 200,000 damage done. So you can still farm pretty nice amounts of damage in this one. I think though, talking of farming, one of the reasons why Narai could be very good for machines like the Atlanta, and we actually have an Atlanta in this game who is going to do very well on the scorecard, is that it could particularly farm lots of planes. And I think the AI logic, and this is just pure guesswork, but I think it spreads its attacks out a little bit more than it did previously. And likewise with the surface ships, I think they put a little more emphasis on attacking the transports than they did previously, but it's kind of hard to tell without getting that information from Wargaming directly as to what parameters they tweaked, because of course that kind of thing isn't going to go in the patch notes. So there goes that Atlanta, actually killed by a secondary gun on the transports, because they can do that, and I'm trusting my allies enough to finish off the straws there. I might take more torps here, but that's fine. I have my damage control available. I'm also turning very broadside to this Colorado, but I'm basically banking on that just being lucky enough to not outright get obliterated, which I didn't think I would be with just his front guns, but that's still a hell of a risky maneuver in the Nelson. But, you know, at this point, this is the last ship. If I have to ram this Colorado, then so be it. So, really, it was just a matter of I wanted to get my front around and get my guns around back on target. Because I'd rather he shoots me with a better chance of surviving than him shooting the Boise there. The Boise, by the way, you know, I've done a round in that. That's rather decent for this mode as well, because you're mostly fighting at short ranges. So, I mean, it's the same as with the Atlanta. The not very good base range just doesn't matter in Narai. Everything is going to be coming to you, essentially. I don't know why I was firing at the upper belt there, by the way, but still, 5 overpens feels a little unnecessarily harsh. I know these guns, like the AP on the Nelson is quite good, but still like short fuse British battleship AP, so it can be a little trollish sometimes. Anyway, once this Colorado's done, that's it. We'll have won, and we'll actually have done so with 5 stars. And we weren't that far off landing enough troopers. We were only, what was that, 85 troops short, so a little less damage, and we actually would have hit the win via that condition instead. But as it was, no, we killed everything. We had, I think, 2 people left alive at the end there, and that was enough. So we'll get to see what the economy is like at this point. That was the 5 stars, of course. They haven't redone it in terms of, like, if you already had the rewards from having done Narai previously, then it's not like you're going to get them again, unfortunately. But in terms of the raw income, and, you know, I was not that far off 300k damage done, you know, that's not too shabby. But that was 500,000 plus raw income, and, you know, obviously this is a premium ship, so that helps. And I've no doubt that the Atlanta there, who is actually from Clyde the Monkeys, one of Clyde the Monkeys' clans, they did even better than I did. So they probably had around the same, if not more, profit. So I think you can still do quite well out of this one. But as I said at the start, I don't think you're going to be able to get those million credit games. It's not quite the farm that it used to be. So after all the costs and everything, and with, you know, flags and whatever else, 450,000 credits for an operation. That's still pretty good. XP wise, it probably isn't as good as it would have been previously, but that's still fine. You know, you have a 5-star run, and I think you can still hit 2k base XP, which, you know, the Atlanta practically did anyway. But you have to be doing pretty well. You have to have done a lot of damage and try to get some bonus plane kills out of it. But even that Atlanta only had 25 plane kills, and previously, and it might still be possible, but I don't think it is. As I've said, I think the planes are a bit more spread out. Previously, you could get run-throughs of Narai with kind of like, you know, 40 plus plane kills without that much difficulty. But I mean, they did the same thing with Hermes as well. They toned down the amount of XP you could get from farming lots and lots of plane kills, but it kind of still helps. At least I think they did that with Hermes. Maybe I'm completely making that up. Anyway, so that's the newly updated Operation Narai. Still fairly enjoyable, and certainly more so than what they've done with Raptor Rescue and the previous one, Ultimate Frontier, which both of those, you know, I think they need some more rejigging. But Narai's in a pretty good place right now, just in terms of enjoyability. So hopefully you found this video useful, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath it, and as always, of course, stay tuned for more.